Guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about AWS, public cloud backup, and the opportunity that exists not only for end users to basically have their workloads protected as they're moving to the public cloud, but also how service providers can leverage that to create service revenue opportunity. So my name's Anthony Spiteri, and I'm a senior global technologist in the product strategy group, focusing on cloud and service provider technology. And I have with me today Siggy Brody, who's CTO of Opta9. Okay, so the first thing that I just want to talk about is the fact that obviously as end users in the crowd, as people who consume and create data with your applications, we have to understand that no matter where the data lives, we need to think about the way that we back it up. Not only backups, but also the way we orchestrate it, the way we manage it, the way we talk about hybridity, and more importantly, data reuse. We've heard a lot about data at this reInvent in different ways, right? It's been kind of the topic of the actual thing as well. So one thing about Veeam, our platform is broad, okay? Now this has been sterilized a little bit because we are at an AWS conference, right? So you'll notice at the top right corner, we're missing some public clouds, but that's okay, all right? However, we cover basically workloads no matter where they sit, no matter where they live these days, okay? We talk about applications with Kubernetes, databases, the cloud with Kubernetes, AWS is obviously what we're talking about here. Still thinking about private and physical, but this can also be virtual workloads as well. So we've got agents that cover Windows, Linux, Mac, you know, we cover the full spectrum. And then software as a service and still the traditional hypervisor space. So obviously we know that none of these are going away. So as Veeam as a platform, we want to make sure that we're protecting them and that we're almost offering our service providers the ability to create services to protect these as well. Okay, wrap around the services to make sure you as end users can focus on your day jobs and make sure your data is protected. The other great thing about Veeam is that we have this concept of mobility. So our portable data format that we actually leverage and we use across all of our platforms, be it virtualization, public cloud and whatnot, has a self-describing file system. Now that self-describing file system means that we're agnostic to any hardware and we're software driven. We don't rely on any file system. But what it actually means is that we can take a workload, back it up into the Veeam format and unlock the portability of that workload. And this is very important in today's hybrid world, okay? Again, this capability allows easy migration, easy testing, but then also easy movement of any data, any workload, whether it's built on a virtualization technology, whether it's coming from physicals, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's in a service provider cloud, to actually move across anywhere, okay? And this is also one of the biggest benefits about Veeam, and certainly our providers leverage this when they're offering services as well. Oh, let's move through the graphic. So just to talk about and focus on this hybridity, okay? The fact that we are living in a hybrid world, we kind of know that the application is now driving the end result of where this actual application of the workload will live, okay? Now, a few stats. I don't like doing stats, but I think these are really important to talk about in terms of talking about where we're going to go with the management of AWS backups as workloads shift. So these are some stats from our data protection report that we did in 2022. So as you can see, since the pandemic kicked in, there's been a sharp decrease in physical servers within the data center. That shouldn't be a surprise to us. We understand that workloads are shifting. The interesting one to me, being an old service provider virtualization guy, is that virtual machines with hosts in our data center are obviously reducing as well. And hosted servers that are in private clouds, but not only private clouds, but service provider clouds, but more importantly, the public cloud like AWS is growing quite rapidly. Now, as these shift and as we move into 2023, 24 and above, we're really going to settle at a equalization with regards to the virtual machines in the data center, 20-25%. But that said, the big part and the big place where these workloads are going to sit moving forward is in that hosted and virtual space. Now, what we see out there is we see a lot of lift and shift from on-premises to AWS, okay, that's happening. But how do you trace that? How do you protect the data when it actually moves? Because you've got control of the data traditionally with our virtualization platform, with the backup and replication software. But then when you move it into the cloud, there's a bit of a misnomer that it's protected by default. You don't have backups. What we need to think about though, as these workloads shift from physical to virtual and the public cloud, is that we still need to back it up. So either you guys can do that as end users. If there's service providers though, how do service providers transform their service offerings from physical and virtual to the public cloud as well? Okay, and that's where we believe that from a managed hybrid cloud point of view, our service providers working with AWS can offer a really good value add. And from a customer's perspective, again, if you're on the bottom end putting your workloads into AWS, how do you back those up? How do you offload the professionalism of what it is to offer backup and to create redundancy, cyber security to a service provider? Okay, you can do that with obviously Veeam Backup for AWS. So I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, because if you guys want to see a demo of this, there's plenty of workstations around that are going to show you a demo of this brilliant piece of software that we've had for 3 years now up to version 5. But effectively it does everything that you see on that screen. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail. What I will say is that the question that we get asked often is, why would you use Veeam Backup for AWS over the native tooling that exists within AWS? Okay, it's a very good question. And I guess it really just depends on, what you're thinking with regards to your whole hybrid and multi-cloud strategy, okay? Now, obviously, there's a certain set of benefit that exists with going with the backup professionals like us. We build this platform on top of AWS primitives. We tap into their API. We use everything that AWS give us to create a more advanced platform. Okay, not only do we advance and unlock that mobility that I talked about, so just think about that. In 5 or 10 years' time, or on the sly, you might want to move away from AWS, right? You might want to stay, hopefully you do. But if you do want to have that choice to move away, you need to think about the way that you unlock your data. You can only do that using a system like this. If you use a native tooling, you've really got no way to get out. Okay. Now the other big thing that we offer, I think, if you're going to talk about the benefits, is cost optimization. The default storage from an AWS perspective, we're roughly 50 to 60% cheaper because of the way that we store the data in that format that we have. So there's lots of positive as well in leveraging AWS. I think the next slide's all about cost optimization as well. How do we then marry the value of that product with what service providers want to offer as well? So we've got this tool called the Service Provider Console. Now this is actually a free tool that we offer to our service providers. It acts as a proxy between all of our platform products. So service providers like Siggy and Opta9 can basically tap into this product and then offer managed services to their resellers or to their end users directly, okay? Now this product does a heap of stuff, okay? I'm not going to talk about any great detail, but for you in the crowd, effectively the big thing that it would do if you're an end user and leveraging it is basically unlock multi-tenancy, the ability to take some self-service, so you don't need to worry about going and, say, deploying that AWS Marketplace appliance. Providers like Siggy and Opta9 can do that for you guys. There's a whole list of what it does. The big thing that I want to point out is the integration with Veeam Backup for AWS. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to hand over to Siggy to talk about how a provider like Opta9 has actually taken the technology, taken the thought process about how they're going to capture workloads moving from on-premises to virtual to the hybrid cloud, and how they can generate good service revenue, offer amazing services, but then how that benefits end users. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Siggy. Siggy, talk to us about Opta9.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Anthony. So as you can see, Veeam is really great software, but as you go into backups, you have to ask yourself, do you want to be in the business of taking ownership and accountability of managing the software yourselves? Do you have an appetite to run that, to be responsible that the RPOs are being met and the RTOs? Many people do, and that's totally appropriate. But for some, they make the decision that, you know what? We are not the experts with this. We'd rather hold a third-party company accountable to an SLA. We'd rather have them take full ownership and accountability, and that's what we do. So at Opta9, we are a hybrid managed service provider, and one of the things that we're doing, we're one of Veeam's largest providers in the world, and we're managing Veeam as a service for our customers. And so we are going to provide the software. We're going to manage it. We are agnostic. We don't care if you want to store the backups on our infrastructure or within AWS. or anywhere else. And so what we're really doing is providing the service, rolling all the storage costs in, the software costs, and the management into one very simple and predictable model that you can budget across, and we'll help you build that. We'll help you with the retention policies and everything in between. So these are our services. Obviously, we're really talking about backups and disaster recovery, but similar to Veeam, it's a hybrid model, right? It's right workload, right cloud, right time. And so we're doing backups and disaster recovery as a service for workloads in AWS, traditional data centers, physical servers, IBM iSeries, unstructured file data. When you look at disaster recovery, you can't protect like 80% or 90% of the environment. If it's still around, it's probably important. And I'm sure people have already asked you, can we virtualize that? And no. And so we cover all of it, right? And so that's what we're doing today. One of the things I think that people often forget about is backups and disaster recovery are an important part of really a cybersecurity program, right? If you want umbrella protection for cyber, yes, you need the proactive threat detection and prevention, but you also need to have disaster recovery and offsite backups configured in the right way in advance. How can you use disaster recovery or a DR site for your incident response? How do you use it as an isolated recovery environment? That has to be pre-orchestrated, pre-configured. We do that. We use Veeam to do that. We use Veeam for disaster recovery. And we will work with your MSSPs to ensure that you can utilize it for that extent. This is a screenshot from our portal. One of the really interesting things that we're doing today is what we've noticed is that as attackers are getting into organizations and trying to ransomware them, like many of us, they're getting trained on all of the backup software that's out there. It's not just, they're getting trained on the AWS console. They're getting trained on how do I find the backups, how do I delete them, so that I increase the likelihood of getting paid the ransom. And so what's interesting is the backup software and the actual consoles are becoming an attack surface that no one's really looking at. And so one of the things that we're doing is we are tied into our customers' Veeam software. They're BNR servers on-prem or AWS, and we're looking at the activities that are. And if we're noticing that retention settings are being modified, or jobs are being changed, or encryption is being disabled in a way that's not normal for that site, and we're using machine learning, we will send notifications to our customers, and we can automatically air gap their DR site. In fact, that could be at AWS or one of our environments. And so that's called Observer. We just launched. We actually launched it at VeeamON with. And what I would, if I'm going to leave you with one thing is, think about your backup infrastructure as something that is going to be under the microscope from the attackers. Really awesome ways that you can harden your data and provide immutability in multiple layers. And think of us as a third party sitting on the outside looking in, providing you with RPO monitoring outside of the software itself, looking at your AWS environment on the outside, and you can just hold us accountable to the SLA and the managed service. That's really all I have to say. We work very closely with Veeam. This guy's probably one of the smartest dudes I know, so thank you for having me.
That's actually quite interesting coming from one of the smartest dudes that I know as well. So anyway, but I think the big thing there is that Opta9 have really thought, as a thought leader and innovator in the space, they took the software that we had even before we had the capability within the console product to go and actually manage Veeam Backup for AWS instances and create a managed service out of it. So we thank Opta9 for that. That said, we have another 3,000 to 4,000 really great managed service providers out there around the world. Okay, so when we think about the big hyperscalers, we think about them as being the dominant players in the hybrid world, but then we've got our, tier one telcos, and then we've got our service providers, a very important cog in that hybrid world. So we're trying to enable them to offer services to make your lives easier. With that, thank you very much for coming, guys, and thanks, Siggy, and we will catch you next time. Cheers, guys.